I have Ivan Čuljak. Could you just, how do you pronounce your second name, Ivan?
Čuljak.
Right, there we go. So obviously, welcome to this week's stream. Thank you very much for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Ivan.
So thank you for inviting me. What to say? I'm from Croatia, or as I was trolling you in Scotland, I'm from where the sun is.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
It seems to be everywhere but Scotland.
So what I do, officially my role would be a cloud solution architect, but I hate that name, so I call myself a cloud whisperer, because why not? It's my company. So I run a company named Celeste Maze, and we're a boutique cloud shop focused on Azure and .NET. So that's basically what we do. And since this year was interesting.
It's been a challenging year, yes.
We've decided to take a look at all the services we have built over the years, and we own the IP, and see which one can we publish. And then the idea came, since it's 2020, we have a problem with the virus. The first thing we're going to release is an antivirus API.
Does it protect against COVID, though, Ivan? That's the real question.
I have no idea. We'll see. So we'll be publishing it on GitHub, so anyone can use it. And we'll see about that, whether it's an okay concept to keep publishing our services so that people coming to the cloud can start using them, or to just deprecate them.
Awesome. That sounds really cool. So a little bit of background. I met Ivan at the Glasgow Azure annual bootcamp day, and you were talking about Azure Functions that day, and it kind of stuck in my, because I hadn't heard about them before then. And obviously that was it. So obviously you're on today to talk about Azure Functions.
Yeah, and I love them. It's not sure how to talk about them without sounding too cheesy, but they make my day. You know, it's a different concept of everything. You can be faster. Sure, you can provide more damage. But at the end of the day, I have a feeling that by using functions, and not only functions, but the serverless concept in general, we are able to provide better solutions to our clients in for less money. Yeah,
they're really cost effective, because that's the thing is like you get lots of different types of functions. Because it's funny, I obviously, you mentioned that you don't like the job title, cloud solution architect. I'm currently sitting actually on this Friday and Saturday. I've got my AZ 303 and my AZ 304 exam back to back. So that's interesting, and I've been learning actually all about Azure Functions, because it's not something I've had. Unfortunately, I had a lot of experience with, like, in my day-to-day role. So what I'm thinking is, what are Azure Functions? Where do you use them? And how can you use them?
Okay, so Azure Functions are a compute model, a way to structure the code, and then you can run them in different places. And just to make it clear, functions aren't serverless. They can be serverless, but functions are a way to form your code, to think about the execution. They can also be run on virtual machines. We'll get to that a bit later. So the basic idea of functions on Azure is that you write your business logic in small chunks in those functions. You pack them up, a number of functions, in something that's called a function app. Neither Google nor AWS have that concept. They have a function per se. We have a bundle. And then you run them. They get triggered on an event, which can even be an HTTP trigger. or something else, a timer, a record saved in a Cosmos DB, anything. They do their magic, they stop doing it. And you don't care about anything underneath it up until a point. And that's when the fun starts. Because when you get to a point that the out-of-the-box solutions don't work for you, you need to start getting creative. For example, if you read through marketing pamphlets, they are like, this is scalable indefinitely, it scales immediately, etc. But if you go into the documentation, you'll see that you can scale a function app up to 200 instances. Now that's a number we can measure, and it's so far from an indefinite number. And then they say you that they guarantee you that you will not get another instance in less than 10 seconds from getting the previous one. So you see, scaling from 0 to 200 is about 2,000 seconds. That's not immediately.
No, that's actually.
Yeah.
So 30 minutes, 40 minutes. That's what about? Yeah.
33 minutes. 0.33.
Yeah.
Half an hour. By that time, everyone gave up going to your site or something. And that's where you need to start getting creative. But the first thing you have to do is do a mind shift. Because what we are used to is if there's a server, it costs $1. If there are 100 servers, it's $100. Right. But with the concept of consumption plans, where you pay for what you use, you can actually deploy 100 function apps and pay only for the usage of them. So what you do, you deploy multiple function apps with the same code. You use a traffic manager, basically a load balancer, in front of them, and then you send requests to each one of them. Sure, the cost will be higher because of the way you are being billed. When you get an instance, you get a lousy machine with a single core and 1.5 gigabytes of RAM. But you are being billed in increments of 128 megabytes. So let's say your function actually uses 50. If you were running 2 functions, 2 executions on a single instance, you would still be billed 128. Right. But if you run them on 2 separate ones, you will be billed twice as much. So sure, it's more expensive, but there's a reason why you said, okay, this is too slow for me, we need to make it faster. And at that moment, you explain to decision makers that, hey, this will cost more, there will be more overhead, but you will gain your performance. If you don't want to go for those hacky ways, they tend to go to sleep after about 20 minutes. Right. So if there's inactivity for 20 minutes, they go to sleep. Those 20 minutes were discovered. You can't read about those in the documentation, and Microsoft can change it any day. So the deal there is that if the instance goes to sleep, you incur a cold start on the next run, which can take anywhere from 2-3 seconds to, 20 seconds with some big Java app. And then it's up to you to optimize it. You can get around that by using something like a timer function, where you have some dummy work every 15 minutes. But that's a hack. And, it's just a matter of when will they be fed up with it and say, okay, you can't do those hacks anymore. We will discover them. We will disable the execution of them. Or will they just let us be? So the next step is running the functions as a plain app service. So you basically get a VM, two VMs, so whatever is underneath an app service plan, and they scale as they would if you deploy the monolith, and that works. So you do have instead of, for example, if you have 2 requests per month on a consumption plan, you would pay a penny. Basically, you wouldn't pay nothing because there's a free tier. And with the app service plan, you would pay $10, $50 per month, but you always have your functions up and running. But they are not as scalable as they would be with the consumption plan. So there's the premium plan, which starts at a few $100s per month. The idea there is that instead of having a lousy VM, a lousy instance, you can actually have a better VM, but you can actually choose how many of those do you want to be kept alive at all time. So they are preheated always.
Okay.
That's why you get a nice bill. I mean, a nice bill. When you try to explain to someone how much will the Azure cost be, and then someone goes, "Wow, that's $50 more per month. Can't you do something about it?" And you say, "Yeah, sure, but that's like 3 months of work, so it's like $50 per month versus 30K."
Yes.
Or 50K or 100K if there's a team. So think about it. Sometimes it's cheaper to just throw money at Azure. It might sound arrogant, but it's cheaper to throw money at Azure sometimes.
No, I totally agree. It's funny. It's one of those things that I've saw quite a lot. I used to be a consultant, and it's funny because people don't always see as that people time as it's not a bill that they have to pay every month. You know, they would some people would pay 10, 15, 20,000 up front, and then but to save a couple of $100 per month. Because that's things like with functions, you know, you've got stateless functions, you've got stateful functions, you've got web app functions, you've got all these different types of functions. And so, and that's the thing. Like, so if you, I believe it's .NET, Node, Java, PowerShell, and Python is the five that five. Sorry, I'm not actually sure. That's the 5 languages that you can use. So, like for instance, I think you've got a PowerShell function that you want to run. Like so, for instance, you've got a ticketing website, right? You can use a functions for that for your booking. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you can that's the thing with functions. But you can have them. So you can kind of treat them like virtual machines. You can kind of treat them like app services, and you can also treat them like serverless as well. It's a bit confusing looking at it, I think.
Well, let's make it more confusing. You can run them in Kubernetes.
Right, okay.
Okay, but there's something even more confusing. So sure, you can run them in Kubernetes now for the last, I don't know, a year, approximately. But there's a thingy called functions runtime. So Lambdas can run on AWS. Google Cloud Functions can run on Google Cloud. Azure Functions can run anywhere. So, for example, we've wrapped them up into a Docker container, deployed them to Google Cloud Run.
Yeah,
it works. But my point was, before we had the ability to easily deploy them to Kubernetes, and before AKS was a really stable thing, we were running them on virtual machines on Azure, because there was a project where people using, so it's a software as a service, but people using it were using it during the normal working hours. So we're talking about Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. So what you do is because Azure Functions instances are slow, and if you're doing any heavy lifting, it's slow. So the only alternative was to actually spin up virtual machines, because before AKS, you weren't able to give powerful machines to, let's say, app service, that they had their own tiers, and that's it. So we created a script which would fire up virtual machines at 7 a.m., shut them down at 7 p.m. So while they were running, we had functions on functions runtime running on those Windows servers. Outside of those hours, we would have them deployed on the consumption plan. So sure, it would be slower, but it was so much cheaper. We're talking about a quarter of a price. And no one really noticed it because we were looking at the analytics, and during a month, there were like 3 requests outside of those working hours. Right. So you can run them anywhere.
That's really cool, actually. It's the fact that you can, you say it's software as a service, but it also sounds like it's infrastructure as a service as well. And then if you're running it on web apps, it's platform as a service, and then it's serverless as well. So I think, honestly, I think one of the questions I probably should ask, what aren't functions? And where can't you deploy them to? That sounds like an easier question and answer.
Let's actually start with what's serverless. So from the AWS camp, not their employee, there's a great guy called Jeremy Daly, and he has a great blog post called "Stop Calling Everything Serverless." Because if you call everything serverless, nothing is serverless. And the point he's making, it's a relatively long blog post, but well worth reading. That's the one. He goes through all the things people said about what serverless is, and then comes to a conclusion that serverless is a culture or a methodology. If you ask me, it's a journey. You can't say functions are serverless, or if you get billed per usage, it's serverless, because you get billed per beer. If you don't have any beer, it's free. People started. Sure, go.
It's more like it's not per beer; it's like per sip of your beer. But yeah, I see what you're saying.
People started coming up with ideas with a serverless spectrum, or with an idea that if I'm not taking care of it, then it must be serverless because it's not my problem. That's an operational construct. And the idea there is that serverless is about focusing on your core business, on what you actually do, and implementing that. Everything else shouldn't be your problem. So you shouldn't be taking care of infrastructure if that's not your thing. You shouldn't be taking care of Alf if that's not your thing. You shouldn't be taking care of SendGrid, of Twilio's job, or of anything if that's not your thing, if that's not what you're building. The problem there is that we were used to building everything from scratch, because you're a bad developer if you don't build your own authentication, your own whatever, and that's how a week worth of a project ends up taking a year. So the idea there is to don't build what isn't your core business and just use a service provided by someone else or something. The problem also is that the service on which you have to rely isn't always up to the level where you need it. So at that moment, you need to be ready to patch it up, hack it up, but still use it. And in your mind, be ready that once that service implements what you've just hacked up, that you will delete your hack. And that's what serverless is. It's a journey, not necessarily a destination, but it's an idea that let's make it simple. Let's keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah.
And build something that will work. Where if you're building, I don't know, let's say Instagram, never used it, but let's say Instagram, that your phone won't ring that an internet service provider in some part of the earth stopped working at 3 a.m. because that's not your problem.
Yeah. No, that's cool. I like that. I like that. I do. Well, that's the thing. I think it's becoming like, I think I'm not a developer. I come from an operations background, and I remember, and this is just about servers. I remember getting quite grumpy. I think it was back in about 2015, 2016, and I remember started hearing about Lambda, and started hearing about functions, right? And it was just like, and this term serverless, and I remember there was probably a little bit of swearing. It's like, what the is serverless? Everything runs on a server, right? But then obviously at that point, that's when I started kind of looking into it a little bit more. And it wasn't about it's not, of course it's running on a server. It's more the fact that you don't need to care about where it runs versus you caring about, that's effectively what it is. It's you caring about the underlying server rather than, hey, I've got a message that I need to send as part of this service. And then obviously this is where serverless or functions really come into their own, I think.
It's that's a fun point, because looking how things evolve throughout years, there's always someone being angry, being on guard about they are gonna steal my job. It's when we've started with Devops, naturally developers were all like, we're gonna lose all the ops people. That didn't happen. When front-end developers got Node.js, then all the back-end engineers were like, they're gonna steal our jobs. Now with the low code platforms like the Power Platform, the developers are complaining they are gonna steal our jobs. They will be able to click something and we will lose our jobs. It's not like that. There's a constant increase in the amount of jobs and projects in the world. It's just that, for example, if you can click something through the Power Platform, and that's good enough for a client, that means that client probably can't afford paying $100K for a custom built project. So that project was never yours to get. But if that project starts earning money with a $200 investment, eventually it will grow big enough for you to take it over. The same with serverless and ops. For most projects, we don't need ops people. You can write infrastructure as code using real code now. You can spin everything up. There are templates, and you grow. You keep growing. You keep growing. Eventually, as I've told you, we were running stuff on VMs. Those VMs needed updating. We were using an Azure VM scaled set.
Right.
Someone needed to prepare those images, but you needed to grow up to that point. Same thing with databases. You can sure use managed databases. At a certain point, you will get to a limit. For example, there's a limit with the transaction log, which is 48 megabytes per second. If you want to write faster than that, tough luck. Spin up some virtual machines, set up a SQL Server cluster or whatever SQL server you prefer. And what do you need? Ops team.
Yeah. It's funny because obviously I've been about in DevOps, and I hate saying this because it's such a cliche thing. I was about in DevOps before DevOps was a thing that I was aware of, because it's not a technology thing, right? It's like DevOps for me is like the thing I used to do, right? I worked in London at the time, and the thing that I used to do was go for a beer with people. So we also, it wasn't a massive company. The company had maybe 6 or 7 offices, but there was maybe an average of like 30 people per office. So like it was only maybe just over 100 people or thereabouts. And I remember like everybody was getting like what I would do is like, it's like developers do silly things, right? And obviously I'm not saying you do silly things, but operations also throw up these barriers, right? Because they're overrun, they're tired of making last minute changes, doing deployments at 2 in the morning, all that sort of stuff that ops does. And what I found was actually DevOps for me was actually just going to the pub, right? I know it's probably a pretty British thing to do, but going having a beer with the developers because we worked in an open plan office, so I was lucky because and then we would have a couple of beers, have a bit of an honest conversation. You're causing me problems because of you're asking me for a ticket, and I remember one time one of the developers was like he basically pushed the entire source code for this Sitecore website. He pushed it onto a public repository. I was just like, what the, and let's say we had a discussion, because what he wanted to do was work with it externally. There's other ways to do that, right? And then, so obviously we certainly had that, but that's the thing. Like DevOps for me isn't so much about, it's about gaining a new team member, so it's I'm not a huge fan of DevOps as a single word. It's like a methodology, a practice. It's about removing, it's like removing, it's like removing barriers and silos, and I'm not a huge fan of, I've been a DevOps engineer and I like the term, but it's not a job title for me, right? For instance, I'm a big fan of so you've got dev, right, and then you've got ops, and see if you could just add in a tiny little plus in between dev and ops. It's dev plus ops. That's where it is. It's more about just being able to understand, and it's cross skilling, because one of the things I used to do was sit with the developers and they would tell me stuff about development. That doesn't make me a developer. It might make me a little dev, big ops, but that's the way I always kind of explained it to people. It's more about, like, for instance, I started with PowerShell and it was like, yeah, okay, certain things that I would automate, certain reports I had to run, anything I had to, creating users. I just had a script that ran and then it just created the user from a CSV. And that's where dev and ops and serverless and all these buzz terms that they do like to throw in all together.
Well, yeah, the idea is to, I can't take over your job. If I can set up CICD, and I'm on purpose not saying setting up DevOps, because that's not the thing. You set up CI, then you set up CD.
Yes.
So if I can set up CI/CD for something, it's not worth your time. They've made it easy. Why? Because you have better things to do. Yep. But how did I get to the point where I can set it up? By talking to ops people. And then, on the other hand, ops people, when they talk to devs, they can learn how we think, how we build stuff. What we suppose is already there. That's a huge thing, because we suppose there's something and it turns out it's not there. And the biggest struggle between the dev and ops team is started way back, because those were different departments, and ops team was always trying to protect the environment, the equipment, the system, whatever. And since developers basically knew that ops team will stop anything that raises even the smallest of alarms, the dev team stopped caring. It was like, here you go test it for me. And then that's when the ops team starts getting angry to the dev team. And then the dev team is like, they're not letting us do anything. We need shadow IT. We need whatever. It's a bunch of crybabies. So people need to learn talking to each other.
This XKCD always, it's a play on Die Hard. And it kind of reminded me what you're saying about ops, just wanting to protect, making sure things are up. But yeah, this is one of my favorite XKCD, along with a password one. But yeah, it's definitely one of my favorite, because that's the thing, is like, you know, because the way I've always saw it is you've got two different levels of knowledge, right? You've got the micro level, which is what developers have, right? They have the micro level detail, so the very fine granular information, whereas ops have macro level knowledge. They know about all, think of it as like a server blueprint. What services are on where, that node one is in location one, etc., etc. So you tend to find that we're looking at it from a high level, whereas developers are looking at it from that micro level detail. One line of code. Like, we don't see one line of code; we just see 16 servers on a server map, and that's where functions is going to help, because how do you even diagram that? Which is always interesting as well, because that's the things, like, operations love a diagram.
Yeah, well, the point you've raised, for example, take fallback to another region, to something. How does that work? I really don't care in most of the cases. There's a checkbox. It says enable fallback. Yay. That's it. It works. How?
See, that's it. That's it. It's all about what you're saying earlier on. It's what you actually care about. Like the failover. That's an ops thing. So that's the thing. And anyway, so enough about this. So from that, how long have you been using Azure Functions?
From about the same month they got public, which is probably now 4 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So when we started using them, they were like, look, cool. There's a cool, shiny new toy. Have no idea what to do with it. Over the time, you figure out what to do with it. And especially as you get, that's the thing I like most about Azure. Everything is integrated. And if it's not integrated, it will be as soon as possible. Because you don't have, it's not a bunch of separate services. There's a plan behind them. How would they need to work together? They aren't necessarily at that level at the moment, but there's a plan how to integrate them. And at the end of the day, everything turns out to work nicely. For example, you can easily connect now API management with event grid, with functions, with Cosmos DB, with something. Everything is serverless or serverless. At least everything is being charged on a consumption base. And how do you integrate those things? There is a button.
Yeah.
3 years ago, there wasn't a button. We needed to do a whole lot of work. And now there's a button. Sure, go.
No, it's awesome. That's the thing, because that's the thing, is like, to be honest, I started using Azure back in 2014. And it really is so different. Like, over the past few years, it's just went. I was kind of forced into Azure because I moved from the London office out to Melbourne, and I went over to be the director of technical services, and it was start a new team, start a whole new business unit from scratch. And I was just so happened that I was because we had that traditional data center. I'd looked at Azure before, and then what happened was, with Azure being in Australia, they launched like 6 weeks after. I was actually in the room with Scott Guthrie. I got invited up to Sydney from Melbourne, and I went in, and there's like Deloitte, PwC, like these huge directors who are coming in, and I'm just like, hello, I'm Derek, and it was weird, right? So like Scott Guthrie sitting there, and he had like Satya Nadella on at that time it was Link, I think, and I'm like blown away. But they started the launch out there. So at that point, it was like everything I did was Azure, or I done a little bit of AWS, because what happened is I like to kind of split my clients over different hosting, because it meant that not everybody shouted at me at the same time. And it was interesting because you look at it now, and all of this is just flying, like even where it was till like 2 years ago. And this is where things like functions, because like you said, Event Grid, all these different applications and products that you can use to simplify stuff. And you're saying earlier on about consumption. Do you know what? The thing is like, I like the fact that I like consumption-based pricing, because the thing I like about it is if you've got that traditional infrastructure as a service, or what you're running is all those VMs, so they're online at all times, unless, like for instance, one of the things that it's like, I think you save something like 63% if you just turn off your hosting in between the hours of 9 and 5 a.m. I think it may even be more than that, to be honest. And this is where I like consumption. The main reason is, okay, you might pay more, but you're probably getting more value from that, because if you're using consumption-based pricing and it is more expensive than your infrastructure as a service thing, that means you're being massively successful as a business and potentially as a developer or a DevOps engineer. So yeah, that it is more expensive, but it's not the most important bit of things.
So it's more expensive per second, but you're not using it for the same amount of seconds. So at the end of the day, it might end up cheaper. The biggest problem I see with consumption plans is the old way enterprises and big companies are used to budgeting the IT department, because you go to them with a proposal and they're like, how much will this cost?
Don't know.
I mean, how many users do you plan to have? But this is a greenfield project. We have no idea how many users will we have. Give me a number, and then we can work. Don't let me imagine how many users will you have. And that's especially a problem when you're before you've even started developing, because you know that there will be, let's say, 1 million users, and they will be doing this and that and etc. But you have no idea how resource intensive will each of those functions or queries be. So you don't have anything to measure. It's a different thing when you're moving stuff. But with IaaS or even platform as a service, you can say 2 servers. It doesn't matter if the latency goes to 2 minutes. We will use 2 servers for the rest of the year. And that's something that has to change. As for cheaper versus more expensive, the bottom line is that everything that you pay per usage, as for example Uber, is more expensive per second, but you're not using it at all time. If you have a need for your infrastructure, if you can figure out a minimum load for your infrastructure, then it's cheaper to serve that load from something that you've paid for a whole month. And this is probably the most easily solvable by using AKS, Azure Kubernetes Service, because you can rent VMs which run underneath it. And then when you have a spike in your load and you need to immediately serve it, instead of taking the time to boost up additional VMs, you can burst out 2 container instances, which are called serverless containers. And the idea there is that you just say, hey, I need a container which has 4 cores, 4 gigs of RAM, and give me a GPU. A GPU will cost you a minute of waiting. But you can get the GPU and you can do some GPU processing on it and then say, I'm done, shut it off.
Yeah.
And that's what you can do with Azure Kubernetes Service, again, by clicking a checkbox. It will burst out there, and it's amazing.
Because that's the thing. When you go, sorry.
I wanted to say that the next step in all that story is CICD, so Kubernetes event-driven applications, where you basically scale. So people are used to monoliths, but when you have microservices, you usually have multiple stages of processing your request. And then the way scaling usually works is when a bunch of requests hits your service, it figures out, hey, I need to scale, and then it starts scaling. That's a problem. But with CICD, you can watch just anything, and when the requests start entering your system at level 0, you can start scaling your level 5 or stage 5, however you want to call it. And that's amazing, because by the time those requests reach that stage 5, you already have enough instances warmed up. And that's just the beauty of it. And again, it just works. There's the source code on GitHub. I sure as hell didn't check it out. I mean, I did scroll through it, but it was like, yeah, sure, it works. Let's deploy it. It's amazing.
If you are interested in running Azure Functions, if you check out GitHub, if you underscore /Azure-samples, if you just type in function, there's 114 samples. So if you are interested in deploying something, you don't have the code, check it out, because that's one of the things. Like, you've got all these servers, and most functions are stateless. So it is, you have a task, you run the task, you shut down. But you also, like, you've got that infrastructure as a service, and where you have a durable function as well. That's correct, is it?
Yeah, we have durable functions, but you can also kind of use the state in a bad way. So what people usually do when going to functions, it's like, you have a legacy application which you used to run only one instance of it on a single server, and it was writing down on the C drive, and that was okay in the 90s, in the early 2000s. But now you just take the code, copy paste it, and then it works and it doesn't work. It works, it doesn't work. Why? The thing is, yeah, sure, you have access to a local drive and you can store files there, but there's no guarantee that the next request will be running on that same instance. So if it does, they will share the storage. If it doesn't, they won't. So people need to worry there, especially if they don't create a new directory for each run, because they will overwrite their files. But that's just a bad practice. Don't do it. As for durable functions, the idea there is, the problem with functions is they can last up to 10 minutes. After that, it's time out, and yeah, baby. And they don't care that you were left with a single second of processing. It's done. So durable functions allow you to orchestrate workflows, to say, do this, and then do that, and do a bunch of stuff. And each of those calls can last for 10 minutes. The magic is in the orchestrator of those workflows. The durable functions function goes to sleep and then wakes up when a result returns. When it wakes up, it goes through everything that happened before and rehydrates the state. It does that by using event sourcing, and all those events are saved on the Azure storage queues, on the Azure storage. And the problem with that rehydration is that if you use and we developers love to use it, a while true loop, you will run out of memory, because you keep rolling. It keeps saving the state. Each time it comes back, it rehydrates all the loops, which is useless. So what you should do, instead of writing a while true loop, is at the end of the execution, just say, hey, context, give me a new, start it again, but forget the history. And with durable functions, you get amazing things like fanning out requests, waiting for them, waiting for some external events. And if you look at samples, those external events are usually, hey, there's a manager who needs to click something, which is okay. We've never had a scenario like that. The way we use it is by, so you get the orchestrator to send a request down a queue for something to be processed, and that something gets processed on-prem. Okay,
Yeah.
But it happened outside of your function. So this was on Azure Durable Functions. That's on, I don't know, a Java Windows service. So what you do is you tell your durable function, hey, we are waiting for an external event. If you need it to time out, sure, set it up. And then you get a unique URL, which you pass to that Windows service when you're sending a request. When the Windows service is done, all it has to do is make a post call to that URL. And you're back in your durable function with a result set, which allows you to orchestrate stuff on-prem or on a VM or basically disconnected from functions.
Awesome. So I've actually been learning about functions recently. I would definitely recommend out Microsoft Learn. I also use Skylines as well recently, which is really good. I'm still. Do you want to? I've learned a bunch. I've only just realised the time, Ivan. Unfortunately, we're actually at the end of today's session. Unfortunately, is there anything that you want to share before we shoot off? Because that's went really quickly. Unfortunately.
Not really. People, be happy, use serverless, and enjoy your day, life.
Awesome. Ivan, honestly, thank you very much for coming along and spending your evening with me. Unfortunately, you'll notice that my green screen has slightly went away. My dog, Angus, came in and almost knocked it over on my head. So I'm going to have to go. But honestly, Ivan, thank you very much. It was awesome.
Thank you for having me.
Honestly, it was great. Thank you so much.
And I hope to see you soon in real life.
Yeah, we were supposed to catch up. I was supposed to be talking at your conference.
That failed miserably.
Honestly, I'm so gutty because I was actually telling my wife. I was showing my wife. I was like, "This is where I'm going to talk," and she was really she doesn't normally. She likes being at home with the dogs and whatnot. But when I showed her the picture of obviously the at the top of the mountain, and I was telling her what I was doing because I actually landed up taking. I was going to fly over on the Thursday. The talk was on the Saturday, and then I was coming back on like the Monday night. So what was supposed to be, I think it was 1 or 2 talks, and then from there I landed up. Unfortunately, I didn't get to go, but I kind of turned that into a mini break for myself because you kindly organised some trips and whatnot. I think we were going to a supercar factory and stuff. So
yeah, we were supposed to go visit the Rimac,
we
call it Rimac, but in English you usually pronounce it Rimac Electric Supercars Factory.
Right. So actually, just before we go, tell us a little bit. Is there any, like, obviously, you're on Twitter. Are you going to be doing any conferences? Because I think you were traveling again, doing conferences and whatnot in Germany.
Well, so last year I did, I think, 37 talks / workshops.
Wow.
Around Europe, so that was too much.
Yeah.
And this year was supposed to be a bit easier, but it ended up being so much easier. I'm due to go to give 2 talks in Germany in November, but that's about it. And we were thinking about postponing the conference for 2021. And then it was like, no, let's postpone it to 2022. But the idea at the end ended up being, let's kill the idea of the conference for now and go with the podcast. We were supposed to have 3 tracks. One was supposed to be real tech. The other one was the third one was supposed to be soft skills, and the second one was supposed to be evergreen tech / soft skills. And there's a bunch of tech podcasts, and I don't plan on making another one, but I think what we really need miss are soft skills, are topics about how to make people welcome in our community in what we do. And that's why we are gonna keep the Above Clouds name, because we want to make people in IT feel above clouds.
I like it. Honestly, that was awesome. If you ever leave a hand on that, just give us a shout. Anyway, I'll wrap up now. Ivan, honestly, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time and coming along. I hate to say this, but I'm going to try and do it. If you do obviously want to check out my content, subscribe, hit the bell, please. But yeah, anyway, I've been DevOps Derek. Really enjoyed today's session, and I'm back next week with Liam Gulliver. And what are we going to talk about? Liam is on next week, and he's going to be talking about. Let's just make sure. Let's actually. I don't remember. Do you know? Honestly, it's one of those things. It's funny because I've got that many people lined up now until like the middle of it. I keep forgetting. Sorry, next week I've got Jack Tracy, and we're talking Azure governance. So please do join next week. Share it with your friends and family. All about Azure. But honestly, Ivan, thank you very much, and I'll see everyone next week.
Thank you, mate. See ya, people.